The sky over Sector Theta burned red as explosions rippled through the atmosphere. Warships from both sides clashed like titans, their engines screaming across the stars. Below, the planet trembled with fear as people ran, hid, or simply stared at the sky in disbelief. On the bridge of the Varelian royal flagship, alarms blared in every direction. The alien princess Lysera stood frozen, her golden eyes locked on the battle unfolding outside the thick glass. She was trained in diplomacy, not war. And this was not a battle she had agreed to start. "Your Highness, we must evacuate," shouted Commander Drell, pulling her arm, but Lysera didn't move. Her heart beat fast as she saw one of her own fleet's vessels crash into a nearby mountain. This war was supposed to be a negotiation, a peace meeting between Earth's Council and the Varelian Empire. But someone wanted it to fail. Someone had fired first. No one knew who, but the blame fell quickly. Now both sides were unleashing destruction on each other. The floor shook. Beneath her feet, the lights flickered. An explosion ripped through the lower deck. Smoke poured through the vents, and the air smelled of burning metal. The ship's AI screamed warnings of hull breach in 12 sections. Drell forced Lysera down the emergency corridor toward the escape pods. She didn't want to leave. Not like this. Not without understanding why peace had turned to war in seconds. She looked back, her eyes full of worry, her mind racing with questions she had no time to ask. Suddenly, the corridor ahead burst open with a blinding flash. A shockwave threw them apart. Drell was flung backward, slamming into the wall. Lysera screamed as the floor under her feet collapsed. She fell, tumbling through smoke and fire, until gravity caught her again. She landed hard in a damaged cargo bay, her dress torn, her knees bleeding, but alive. The walls around her groaned as the ship began breaking apart. She stumbled to her feet, trying to find another exit. Her comms were dead. The ship was failing. An automated voice began counting down. 10 seconds to core overload. The room shuddered, and a hatch on the ceiling opened. A pod dropped down, blinking blue. Without thinking, she climbed in. She didn't know where it would go. She only knew she had to leave. The pod shot out from the ship, just as the flagship exploded into a ball of fire. Metal and ash flew in every direction. Inside the pod, Lysera could only stare as her royal ship vanished from the sky. Her home was gone. Her people were burning. The pod hit the planet's atmosphere like a comet. Flames surrounded it. Systems failed. Parachutes didn't deploy. It was going too fast. The crash was inevitable. She closed her eyes and whispered a goodbye to her family. No one would survive a fall like this. Down on the surface, a young human technician named Jack was scanning the sky near the military outpost. His station had gone silent since the first attack. He hadn't spoken to anyone in hours, but something caught his eye. A flash of fire falling from the sky. At first, he thought it was debris, but the shape was wrong. It was too smooth, too controlled. His scanner lit up. Life detected. Someone was inside. Jack grabbed his jetpack and ran toward the coordinates. He didn't know why. He just knew someone needed help. The pod screamed toward the ground like a dying star. Trees bent. Birds scattered. Dust flew into the air. Jack didn't stop. His lungs burned as he sprinted. Then he saw it. The pod was right above him, out of control. And through the glass, he saw her. The alien girl had her hands pressed to the window. Her eyes were wide with fear. Her red hair floated around her like fire. She was beautiful, not human, but beautiful in a way Jack had never seen. The pod cracked open in the air as it hit a tree and spiraled down. Jack didn't hesitate. He jumped. His jetpack roared as he reached the falling pod. He reached his hand out. The girl inside reached back. The glass shattered, the metal split. She was falling. Jack caught her in midair, pulling her into his arms with all his strength. They hit the ground together, hard. Leaves and dirt flew everywhere. Jack rolled, holding her close, shielding her from impact. Pain shot through his side, but he was alive. More importantly, so was she. She looked up at him, her voice trembling. "Everyone moved but you, why?" Jack blinked against the sunlight as pain throbbed in his shoulder. He was lying on the forest floor with dirt in his mouth and leaves tangled in his jacket. The alien girl was still in his arms, her eyes wide, her body trembling, but alive. She pushed herself up slowly, her arms shaking as she looked around. Smoke drifted from the broken escape pod behind them. Sharp pieces of metal stuck from the trees like spears. The smell of burned circuits filled the air. But they had survived. Jack coughed, then winced. Something might have broken in his ribs, but he didn't care. His eyes stayed locked on the girl in front of him. Her green skin was glowing slightly. In the light, her red hair shimmered like fire. She didn't look real. But she was. She turned to him and said something in her language. Her voice was soft but full of urgency. Jack shook his head slowly, raising his hands to show he didn't understand. Her shoulders dropped a little as she realized the communication barrier between them. Then she noticed the wound on his arm. A sharp shard had cut through his sleeve. Blood dripped down to his fingertips. Without speaking, she leaned forward and touched the injury gently. Her fingers glowed, and within seconds, the pain faded. Jack gasped. His eyes went wide as he stared at his now healed arm. He looked back at her in shock. She tilted her head and gave a small smile. It was the first sign of warmth since the sky turned red. Jack tried to smile back, but failed to speak. A sudden boom in the sky made them both flinch. Another explosion echoed in the distance. Jets flew overhead, and debris rained down from the atmosphere. The war above hadn't ended. It had only just begun. Jack pulled her close and moved toward the trees. They ran through the forest, dodging broken branches and scorched earth. Jack led her toward the only safe place he could think of, a hidden maintenance shed used during drills. It wasn't far. But with each passing second, the sky grew darker. They reached the small shelter hidden between thick roots and rocks. Jack opened the hatch and waved her inside. She crawled in without hesitation. He followed, sealing the door behind them. Inside, the lights flickered weakly but held. The space was tight but warm. Old tools lined the shelves, and a cracked monitor buzzed on the wall. Jack sat down, breathing hard, while the girl looked around in silence. She seemed calm, but her fingers never stopped twitching. She was scared. Jack picked up a broken tablet and opened the translation program. It barely worked anymore, but maybe it could help. He typed a few simple words and turned the screen toward her. She read it slowly, then nodded once. Her name appeared on the screen next, Lysera. That was her name. Jack pointed at himself and said his name out loud. She repeated it softly, Jack. For a moment, it felt like something between them had begun to shift. Not trust, not yet, but something close to understanding. He typed again, asking where she came from. She typed back that she was a princess from the Varelian Empire. Her ship had been attacked by unknown forces. She believed someone had betrayed her people and triggered the war on purpose. Jack stared at the words, a princess. He had caught a falling princess from the sky. And now she was here, hiding in a broken shed in the middle of a forest on Earth. Nothing made sense. But one thing was clear. She was not safe out here. The sounds of distant ships buzzed above again. Jack peeked through a small gap in the wall. Searchlights scanned the forest. Someone was looking for something or someone. Lysera watched him closely, sensing the danger too. He turned back to her and made a gesture with his hands. She understood it meant stay. Then he reached for the old comm unit. It still worked, but only for short-range signals. He had to find help. Someone who wouldn't shoot first and ask questions later. She grabbed his arm before he could. Stand, her eyes locked onto his fear, not for herself but for him. Jack gave a small nod and gently pulled away. He had survived a war zone once before. He could do it again. Especially if someone innocent needed him. He stepped outside, closing the hatch behind him. The sky above burned with smoke and metal, but Jack didn't look up. He had a job to do. He had to protect her, not because she was a princess, but because he was human, and that's what humans do. Jack moved through the forest with quick steps, each one carefully placed to avoid making noise. His eyes stayed sharp, scanning for any movement. The searchlights above kept sweeping through the trees, chasing shadows like ghosts. He crouched behind a fallen log and listened. The humming of drones grew louder. They were getting closer. He knew they weren't looking for just wreckage. They were searching for survivors. And if they found the alien girl, they wouldn't ask who she was before pulling the trigger. The small radio device in his hand blinked with weak power. It was all he had to send a message to someone who might help. But interference from the battle above was ruining the signal. He had to find higher ground to boost it. Climbing a small ridge, Jack found a rocky point that overlooked the forest. He raised the antenna and tapped the buttons, whispering into the mic. "This is Jack Carter, civilian technician. I have a survivor, not human, but peaceful. Please respond." He waited. Only static answered back. He adjusted the dial again and repeated the call. Still nothing. Time was running out, and the drones were closing in. Jack bit his lip and sent a location ping, hoping it would reach someone on the resistance side of the line. He slid down the ridge and made his way back toward the hidden shed. Every sound felt louder, now the crunch of his boots, the snap of a twig, the distant boom of weapons in the sky. He moved faster, knowing she was waiting, inside the shed. Lysera sat with her knees pulled up, her hands resting gently on the tablet Jack had left. She had read every word they had exchanged twice. He was unlike anyone she had ever met. No crown, no army. Just courage and kindness. When the hatch creaked open, she jumped. But seeing Jack's face brought her relief. He entered quickly, wiping sweat from his brow, and knelt beside her. She looked at him with a question in her eyes, and he shook his head slowly. No signal, not yet. She typed something onto the tablet and showed it to him. "They will kill you for helping me." Jack read the message, then looked her in the eyes. "Not if I can help it," he whispered. She didn't reply, but her lips trembled slightly. He checked the scanner one last time. Multiple signals were coming closer. The drones were fanning out. He had to move her again. He pointed toward the back of the shelter, where an old maintenance tunnel ran deep under the trees. Lysera nodded and followed him. The tunnel was cold and damp, but it was hidden. The two moved in silence, guided by the faint glow of Jack's flashlight. Water dripped from the ceiling. Insects scattered before their steps. The air was heavy and stale. They finally reached a locked gate. Jack used his tools to break the rusted latch. Beyond it was an old supply room with a working terminal. It still had power. Jack smiled. With luck, he could boost the signal from here. He connected the device and sent the emergency message again. This time, a reply came, static at first, then a voice. "This is Echo 9. Who is this?" Jack nearly shouted from joy. "Technician Carter. I've got a friendly alien survivor. Request evac and protection." "She's important." The line went quiet for a moment, then the voice returned. "Understood. Sending coordinates. Hold position." Jack sighed with relief. Help was coming. He turned to Lysera and gave a thumbs up. She tilted her head, then smiled faintly in return. But that moment was shattered by the sudden sound of metal tearing. A blast from above had struck near the tunnel entrance. Dust poured in. The lights flickered. The entire tunnel shook. Jack grabbed Lysera's hand and pulled her deeper into the room. She held tightly, her body trembling. Jack kept her close, shielding her from falling debris. "We just need 10 more minutes," he said softly. She didn't understand the words, but she understood the tone. She nodded, pressing her forehead gently against his shoulder. The walls creaked again, and smoke crept in. Jack knew if the tunnel collapsed, they would be trapped. But he also knew that somewhere above, someone was coming. Someone had heard the message. All he had to do now was keep her alive until they arrived. The tunnel continued to tremble as the noise above grew louder. Jack leaned over the console, eyes locked on the blinking screen. The evac signal was still active, but there was no update on the rescue team's position. Beside him, Lysera crouched silently. Her hands gripped her knees, and her eyes stayed fixed on the entryway behind them. Every vibration in the metal made her flinch. She had faced danger before, but never like this. This was raw, close, and without protection. Jack reached into a nearby crate and pulled out a small energy pack. It was old, but it could charge the terminal one more time if needed. He handed Lysera a blanket from the same crate. She hesitated, then wrapped it around herself and nodded. The tunnel lights dimmed for a second, then returned. Jack muttered something under his breath and adjusted the scanner. There were 3 signals near the tunnel entrance. Too small to be dropships, too fast to be human soldiers. Drones. He typed a quick warning to Echo 9 on the console. Drones. Near tunnel entrance. Request immediate backup. The message sent, but no reply came. Either the signal was blocked, or Echo 9 was already moving. Jack didn't like waiting for answers. Lysera stood and moved closer to Jack. She pointed at the scanner, then at the side wall of the tunnel. Jack frowned. She tapped the wall again, and made a slicing motion with her hand. He finally understood. There was another path. A hidden one. They searched the wall together until Jack's fingers found a loose panel. Behind it, a narrow vent sloped upward. It was barely wide enough for one person. Jack looked at her. She nodded. They had no choice. Staying meant death. Moving meant a chance. He went in first, crawling on his elbows and knees. The metal scraped his skin, and the heat from above made the air thick. Behind him, Lysera followed, her breathing steady. Neither of them spoke. There was only the sound of movement and tension. The vent opened into a dark storage chamber lit by emergency lights. Jack climbed out and helped Lysera down. The room was empty except for sealed supply lockers and an inactive loader unit. But more importantly, the roof was cracked open to the sky. Jack stepped onto a pile of rubble and scanned the open gap. The stars above were dim behind the drifting smoke. Then he saw it. A fast-moving dropship was approaching. Small and gray. No lights, no sound. It matched the type used by Echo 9. He waved his arms and pointed a light at the sky. The ship slowed, hovering just above the chamber. A rope line dropped. Jack motioned to Lysera, and she hurried to him. The ship's bay doors began to open. Help was here, but time was against them. Suddenly, a loud blast shook the ground. One of the drones had found the old entrance. A hole burst open in the far wall, and red scanner beams filled the room. Jack grabbed Lysera and pushed her toward the rope. "Climb!" he shouted. She climbed quickly, her thin frame moving fast. Despite exhaustion, Jack waited until she was halfway up before grabbing the rope himself. Below them, the drone whirred and scanned, then it fired. The beam missed Jack's foot by inches. The ship pulled them up fast. Jack reached the open bay and grabbed Lysera's hand. Together, they rolled inside as the hatch closed behind them. The pilot gave a quick thumbs up. Jack collapsed on the floor, gasping. Lysera sat beside him, silent but safe. A medic moved to check Jack's wounds. but he waved him off. His eyes were on Lysera. She had curled up in the corner of the ship, the blanket still wrapped around her. Her hands shook slightly, and her gaze stayed on the floor. She looked lost. Jack crawled over and sat beside her. He didn't speak. He just placed a hand on her shoulder. She turned her head slowly and met his eyes. No translator was needed. She was grateful. She was scared. And she wasn't alone anymore. As the ship flew through the smoke-filled sky, Lysera finally whispered one word in broken English. "Why?" Jack looked at her, then out the window at the burning horizon. He didn't have the answer yet, but he would find it for her. The dropship soared through thick clouds as warning sirens echoed faintly from distant cities. Below them, flashes of battle painted the sky in red and gold. Jack sat quietly beside Lysera, his breath finally steady after the chaos in the tunnels. The pilot kept the ship low, avoiding larger enemy radars. His gloved hands moved quickly over the controls. He didn't speak, and Jack didn't ask questions. There wasn't time for talk. Not when war had taken over the planet. Lysera kept her eyes on the floor, still wrapped in the blanket. Her hands rested in her lap, but every so often they clenched and unclenched. She looked fragile now, so different from the bright figure that had fallen from the sky. Jack finally spoke, keeping his voice low. "You okay?" She looked up at him with tired eyes. She didn't answer. Instead, she touched the edge of the blanket and nodded once. It wasn't much, but it was something. The ship's communicator crackled. "Approaching Echo 9 base. Prepare for ground contact." The ship began to descend. Jack held onto the rail as gravity shifted. Lysera stayed still, her gaze now fixed out the window where the land came back into view. The Echo 9 base was small, hidden between cliffs and shielded by old tech that barely held together. But it was safe. Jack had been there once before during a supply mission. It wasn't built for royalty, but it was the best they had left. The ship touched down with a rough bump. The hatch opened, and soldiers moved in quickly. They didn't point guns, they didn't shout. They simply nodded and stepped aside to let Jack and Lysera through. One medic offered help, but Lysera shook her head. Jack guided her through the dim corridors of the base. Wires hung from ceilings, and the air smelled of oil and dust. Screens flickered with incoming reports. Every face they passed looked worn and sleepless. War had touched them all. A female officer approached. "I'm Lieutenant Vale," she said, offering her hand. Jack introduced himself and explained the situation briefly. Vale listened carefully, her eyes drifting to Lysera with curiosity but no judgment. "We have a secure room she can rest in," Vale said. "And a working translator if she's willing to speak," Jack nodded. He turned to Lysera and motioned gently. She followed without complaint. For now, rest was all that mattered. They led her to a small room with a single bed and a clean sink. A guard stood outside, not to trap her, but to keep her safe. Jack watched as she stepped inside. Before the door closed, she looked back and gave him a slow, tired nod. Later that night, Jack sat in the mess hall alone. The food was cold, but it filled his stomach. Around him, soldiers whispered about the strange guest. Some feared her, some didn't believe she was real. But none dared approach her directly. Vale sat across from him with a data pad. "You brought a princess into a war zone," she said. Jack shrugged. "Didn't know she was royalty when I caught her." Vale smiled faintly, then showed him the screen. "This is her file. You should see this." The screen displayed her full name, title, and diplomatic record. Lysera was not just a princess. She was the heir to the Varelian throne. Her presence on Earth wasn't random. She had been sent to secure peace between the two races. Jack leaned back in his seat. It made sense now. The broken treaty, the surprise attack, the strange silence on both sides. Someone had wanted the peace mission to fail, and throwing the princess from a burning ship had nearly finished the job. We need to protect her, Jack said. Vale nodded. We will, but not everyone here trusts aliens. Especially now, Jack understood. Trust was rare during war. But Lysera had healed his wound. She had followed him through fire and fear without hesitation. The next morning, Jack returned to her room. She was awake, standing by the window. The translator device buzzed quietly on the table. She looked at him, then typed something. The screen showed one word. Why? Jack stepped closer. Because you didn't deserve to fall, he said. She read the translation and stared at him. Then she typed again. My people may already think I'm dead. Jack looked her in the eyes and gave a calm answer. Then we'll show them you're not. Lysera stood in the middle of the command room, dressed in clean clothes given by the Echo 9 base staff. Her eyes moved across the map displayed on the screen. Red dots showed enemy activity spreading across several regions. Jack stood beside her, pointing out locations and explaining what each signal meant. She listened carefully, nodding from time to time. Her calm face didn't show fear, but Jack could see the weight behind her silence. Lieutenant Vale leaned over the terminal and connected a secure channel. We've confirmed that her people believe she was killed in the explosion. No attempt has been made to recover her body. They think she's gone. Lysera turned to face them, her expression unreadable. She tapped on the translator and typed slowly. If they think I'm dead, they won't be looking for me. That gives us time to act. Jack crossed his arms. What kind of action are you thinking about? She typed again. I need to speak to my father, but not from here. They'd intercept the message. I need to reach a relay tower. Vale frowned. That's dangerous. The closest working relay is across the valley, deep in contested territory. Jack stepped forward without hesitation. Then I'll take her. Lysera looked at him for a moment before typing. You've already risked your life enough. Jack shook his head. Not enough if it means saving yours. Or stopping more war. Preparations began within the hour. Jack packed light just food, water, a short-range communicator, and a compact blaster. Lysera wore a field cloak and a protective vest. The path ahead was risky, but both of them had made up their minds. They left at dawn. The forest around the Echo 9 base was thick with shadows, and ash drifted from the skies above. Distant explosions still echoed now and then, but the route remained quiet. For now, silence was their ally. Jack led them through dry riverbeds and crumbling bridges. He moved quickly but checked behind him often. Lysera stayed close, her steps quiet and sure. She didn't complain once. She didn't ask for rest. She was stronger than she looked. As they neared the halfway mark, Jack paused by a large rock and signaled her to stop. A scouting drone hovered nearby. They dropped to the ground, holding their breath as the red beam passed overhead and moved on without alert. Jack waited a minute, then gave her a thumbs up. She nodded and followed him down a hidden path behind a ridge. The wind picked up, carrying the sound of marching troops from somewhere nearby. Time was running short. By mid-afternoon, they reached the edge of a small abandoned village. The relay tower stood in the center, leaning slightly but still intact. A few broken satellite dishes hung from its sides. Jack studied the structure with narrowed eyes. There could be traps, he said. Lysera scanned the area carefully. We'll be fast. They moved together through the open square, stepping over debris and shattered stone. The tower loomed above them like a sleeping giant. Inside the control station, Jack powered up the system. Sparks jumped from the terminal, but the screen flickered to life. Lysera stepped forward, typing in access codes from memory. Her fingers moved faster. Mind focused. The screen changed. A connection was forming. Jack stood ready in case anything went wrong. The signal jumped once, then stabilized. Lysera tapped the mic and spoke in her language. Her voice was firm, controlled, full of purpose. A figure appeared on the screen. An older man in royal robes. His face froze in shock at the sight of her. He spoke quickly. Jack didn't understand, but the tears in the man's eyes told him this was her father. Lysera gave a report in short, clear words. She spoke of betrayal, survival, and the hope for peace. Jack watched as the royal guards behind the king leaned forward, listening closely. This wasn't just a reunion. It was the beginning of something bigger. She ended the message and cut the connection before anyone could trace the signal. Jack turned to her. Did he believe you? She nodded. He will come. With proof, with peace. But only if we get out alive. Outside, the wind howled louder. Jack looked out the window and saw movement in the trees. Drones, soldiers. The tower had been found. He turned to Lysera and grabbed his weapon. Then we'd better run. Jack pulled Lysera away from the window as the shadows outside grew thicker. The enemy was moving fast, likely drawn by the brief signal burst from the relay tower. They didn't have much time to escape. He slung his pack over one shoulder and handed Lysera a small energy shield. Use this only if you're cornered, he said. She nodded, slipping it onto her wrist without question. Her face was calm, but her eyes burned with focus. They exited through the back of the control station, slipping into narrow alleys between the crumbling buildings. Every step felt heavier, and every sound sharper. Jack kept low, leading her toward the edge of the village. A sudden drone were cut through the silence. Jack pulled her into a collapsed building just as a scanner beam passed by. They crouched behind a shattered wall, barely breathing as the machine hovered inches above their heads. Once it passed, they broke into a run. Dust kicked up behind their boots. Gunfire burst out from a nearby rooftop, forcing them to slide behind a rusted vehicle. The shots were not warning rounds. Someone wanted them dead. Jack peeked out and spotted two figures with rifles scanning the area. Mercenaries, not military. That meant someone had paid them to stop anyone reaching the tower. Lysera tapped his arm, showing him a side route through broken fencing. They moved again, crawling through rubble and ducking under broken supports. A bullet struck the ground near Lysera's foot, sending sparks flying. Jack fired 2 shots back and then dragged her into cover behind a low stone wall. They were pinned down. The soldiers were advancing fast. Jack looked at Lysera and pointed toward a narrow hill just beyond the edge of the village. If they reached that hill, Echo 9 could pick up their emergency signal again. Lysera activated her energy shield and nodded. Jack created a distraction, throwing a smoke grenade across the road. The thick cloud gave them a few seconds. They sprinted. Out, bullets snapping past them as they ran. The hill felt like a mountain beneath their feet. Jack's legs burned with each step. Lysera tripped once, but got back up without hesitation. Her cloak was torn. Her breath came in short gasps. But she didn't stop moving. They reached the top and slid behind a boulder. Jack activated his beacon and prayed it would connect. Static filled the small screen for a moment, then cleared. A blinking green light appeared. Echo 9 had received the signal. Evac en route. 8 of 5 minutes. The message read. Jack exhaled deeply. 5 minutes felt like forever when death chased you. He checked his weapon. Only 2 charges left. Lysera's shield was still glowing, but it was flickering now, below them. The mercenaries regrouped and began climbing the hill. Jack and Lysera backed up slowly, staying hidden behind cover. We have to hold them here, Jack said. She didn't reply, but her grip on the shield tightened. Jack stood up and fired a warning shot. The mercenaries ducked, but kept advancing. One fired back, striking the stone beside Jack's head. Lysera threw up her shield, blocking the next round. Then she stepped forward with unexpected boldness. She shouted something in her language. Her voice echoed across the hillside. The mercenaries paused, surprised. She raised her hands, showing she was unarmed. They hesitated, unsure whether to shoot or listen. Jack stood beside her, weapon still raised. "They don't want her to talk," he said quietly. "That means what she said earlier might really change things." He fired a second shot into the air. That time, the mercenaries started falling back. A roar overhead signaled the arrival of the dropship. Its engine stirred the dust and grass. As it hovered low, the side door slid open, and two soldiers waved them aboard. Jack grabbed Lysera's arm, and they ran toward the ship. Gunfire followed them, but it was scattered and weak. The mercenaries had lost their chance. Jack and Lysera leaped into the bay as the ship lifted off. The door slammed shut behind them, and they collapsed onto the floor in silence. Jack rolled over, chest heaving, and looked at her. She lay beside him, face tilted toward the ceiling. Despite the bruises and dirt, there was a small smile on her lips. He smiled too, breathing slowly now. "You all right?" he asked. She gave a tiny nod and whispered one word he had taught her earlier. "Safe." Asterisk. The dropship cut through the smoky skies, flying fast toward the border zone where temporary peace talks were rumored to begin. Jack sat strapped into a side seat, his body sore but alert. Beside him, Lysera leaned back, eyes closed, conserving her strength. Echo 9 had moved quickly once her message reached the Varelian throne. A response came faster than anyone expected. The king had sent envoys to confirm her survival, and now both human and alien commanders agreed to a ceasefire long enough to meet. They landed near a wide plateau surrounded by watchtowers and guarded by both sides. Neutral ground had been created for this single meeting. No weapons, no drones. Just leaders and truth. The air carried the weight of history in every breath. Lysera stepped onto the rocky surface with Jack at her side. Her clothes were torn and stained, her face pale from exhaustion, but she walked tall. The Varelian envoys stared in disbelief. One of them dropped to one knee, whispering her full title with reverence. The human officers were no less stunned. Jack heard one mutter, "She's real," under his breath. Others watched silently as the once lost princess crossed into the center of the field, the broken soldier beside her acting as her only escort. A large monitor was placed between the two groups. It sparked to life with a direct visual link to the Varelian throne room. The king appeared on screen, dressed in full ceremonial robes. His voice broke when he saw her alive. Lysera bowed her head, speaking in her native tongue. The translator repeated her words aloud in English. "I am alive. I was thrown from my ship by the same traitors who began this war. I was rescued by a human. I stand now because of him." The human commanders looked at Jack. He shifted awkwardly but remained silent. He didn't want praise. He just wanted peace. Lysera continued. "There is still a chance to stop this, but only if the truth is shared. Only if we fight the right enemy." Her father nodded gravely. "The traitors will be hunted, but what of Earth? Will they believe you?" Lysera turned to the human general nearby. The man nodded and stepped forward. "If this is real, then Earth supports her return." And a ceasefire. Tension filled the air as silence followed. Then the king raised his hand and gave a single command. "Prepare for her arrival. The throne remains hers." The screen went black. The Varelian envoys bowed again and began making preparations. Lysera turned to Jack, her expression softer. "Now, will you come with me?" she asked. Jack blinked. "To your world?" She nodded. "They must hear the truth. And they need to see it came from both of us." He hesitated. He had never been off Earth before. Never stood in front of kings or walked inside alien palaces. But he had seen war. He had carried hope. He looked into her eyes and knew his answer without words. "I'll go," he said, "until this is finished." Her lips curved into a quiet Smile, not royal, not diplomatic, just human. They walked together toward the transport ship waiting nearby. The sun broke through the clouds for the first time in days. Soldiers from both sides lowered their weapons. The wind was quiet now. The sky no longer screamed. A new path had opened, not through force, but through an unexpected bond. Inside the ship, Lucera sat beside him once more. This time, she held his hand without needing to ask. Jack looked at her, then out the window at the shrinking earth below. He didn't know what challenges waited ahead. But he wasn't afraid, because he had caught her when she fell. And now she was rising again, and he would rise with her. Together, they would finish what had been started.